looking at this ridiculous detail.
Flexible, I mean, that. I got something. Good yet. Not like a USB hub. What the fuck? So we got that USB hub. I would just actually automate my laptop. I'll be crashed. Let's see what comes out.
Does anyone have the ability to present VGA? We have modern technology that is now reached the crossing point. It is no longer possible to use modern machines with whatever crap they have in here. Right, now you got 1,000 other things. Well, that one.
So if you have an HP cable, you can just plug your laptop into here. And what slides in this chair? That's a short cable.
So we are actually at our scheduled start time, so if we can, is anyone willing to take some notes for this? You can just peek that. Yeah, you're going to be up here in a minute or so. So is anyone willing to sort of pinch it for Dave?
Whoa.
You have taken too much Z in this. So for the benefit of those who might don't want you seeing the slides, we're sorry, we'll try to give you a second. There's no one before. Yeah, there's a couple of people now. So the agenda is online. That's not the one we're starting with. Do you want to pick the one that we're starting with? Would you like those dollars? Yeah.
Stay with me.
It was 30 minutes to go through the things. Yeah. You go to the next one. So the agenda is online. I uploaded a text file to the meeting materials. It should all be present. So we're obliged to show you the note well. If you have IPR or know of IPR, you probably want to read those documents and learn what you need to do with that. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. Talk to me, talk to Derek, talk to Adam, talk to someone. Maybe you should not be contributing unless you know your obligations are. This is the agenda that we have up online today, so we can find it. That's true, we'll fix it. But, yeah. Some of the meeting materials, it should be there. I'm going to spend a few more, if anyone wants to change this, no, but our intent is to spend a little bit of time talking about what the milestones that we're at, how the chairs believe we should proceed. Then Dave's got some presentation time on architecture. David's going to talk about his CPD drop, how that fits in there. Tommy, just Tommy, the ones up on the meeting materials, that's correct. He's going to talk about PPD and how he thinks that fits into the whole picture. And then Mark is going to talk about the API and how that fits into the greater picture. One thing to observe here is that Dave's going to be talking about the architecture as a whole, which means that there are some rat holes on his slides. We will be asking you to help enter those rat holes during Dave's presentation so that he can concentrate on the important questions for his presentation. And we'll talk about the rat holes when we get to the presentation slides. Next one. So these are our milestones as they stand right now, and you might notice something that they all have. Yes. Yeah, woefully out of date. And so the hope here is that we can have this discussion and come to some sort of conclusion about what it is that we want to do and what we want to do it. And we will hopefully have some conclusions, have some drafts today. If not, we will be, either way, we will be talking to Adam about revising milestones at the end of this session. Maybe after a couple of weeks when we have some calls for adoption now. We're so fortunate that we seem to have consensus about documents.
You can change dates though.
Dates are not the problem in this case. I will point out that the taxonomy and the survey were aspirational at best, and it might be that we're not going to deliver on anything like that. The first one might turn into several things, because we have a document for ICP, we have a document for an architecture. That doesn't really fit into the milestone that we have there, and so we want to talk about the first one. So just keep that in mind as we go to next. So one of the things that Eric and I have been talking about, and I think we've talked to several people about this, is we want to make sure that we deliver something, anything that we do. And so the idea here is to try to narrow this down as aggressively as possible and come up with the one small thing that can include informal documents and solutions that people can ship. And so part of the point of this discussion is to sort of scope out and set in people's minds what the sort of problems we want to so these are the questions I think we need to grab here today. That is there a practical? That's a fundamental question, and I'm not sure that we can properly answer with the tools that we have right now. Where is the captive portal if I want to go and talk to it? Is the second question, and you could suggest that 7710 might try to answer both those questions at once, but it's certainly always the case. And if there's any sort of deficiencies with 7710, what do we need to do to fix that, and what steps? But I might talk about that some more in this presentation. And then once we get there, what does the portal need to provide? If you're wondering what's going on here, we have no way of driving the VGA. We have two people remote, and we've apologized to them, and we're having straight in here. Sorry. So what information does the captive portal provide, and then it's the business then of making the API documents. Next, please. So in talking to people, this seemed to be the sort of scope of work that we were talking about happening. It's not one question, it's two questions now. But as long as we have ways of going beyond the basic question, as long as we don't foreclose on options for going beyond this, we would like to suggest that we concentrate initially on answering the question of, am I captive? And then, as we can't do that. Yes. So this is the only one that actually has action one. Come back here.
Do it. You're taking my slides away.
One computer, I think.
It's almost done.
The change of that thing is much. All right. Well, thank you for your efforts. Do you want to fix that? Okay, so I'd like to ask anyone now if you have anything you'd like to add to the file. This is the wrong answer. We're the wrong things. Speak now.
Hi, David Olson. I will, this for a minimum feature set. I think that we've also should look at how to notify the users other than HTTP redirection. So I guess that could be, am I captive? But for
relying on things other than HTTP redirection to get that signal.
yeah.
Yes, I think that's implicit in this.
Okay.
Yeah. The
I'm just saying what.
accepted wisdom here is that HTTP redirection is busted, and so we can't rely on that.
I guess I'm just hoping it goes beyond am I captive being discovered by. I think you answered this already, but just to make it explicit, to be am I captive to be discovered by means other than probing a port 80 with a no response.
Yes, yes. And I've got a little bit of a taxonomy of the solutions we have on the next slide.
Tommy Polly Apple. Right, I think this list of 2 is good to the point of like, so yes, the discovery should not be HTTP redirect, although I imagine that we should probably say that for the minimum viable product here, that a captive portal that is still interacted with using HTTP in a standard way is totally what should be done, and all the extensions to doing something other than that are the extensions that we leave open, but we should focus on the HTTP still.
So yeah, and when you talk about extensions there, the important point is we don't close the door to the things that we want to do. Because there are a lot of things that people wanted to do. I mean, Mark's draft originally had a whole bunch of things you could do. And there are legitimate use cases driving all of these things, and we need to at least let the options open and have a discussion about that. I'm moving on to the next one, Eric. This is my last slide. This is my understanding of where we the various options we have in front of us. I did not include the HTTP redirection thing. That on the bottom, HTTP 511. My understanding is that 7710 will tell you what captive and will tell you where that is. ICMP will tell you if you're captive. There's some extra stuff in there that I don't understand about information, but basically it does have a basic signal captive. PDD will tell you where the captive portal is and that you are, maybe that you are captive, maybe not, I'm not sure. It might just tell you where it is so that you can ask it whether you're captive. I don't know what the exact conclusion is. We should talk about that. And the API is purely aimed at providing the information and maybe solutions. I put the HTTP 511 there because we seem to be having a bunch of discussion there. It is my reading from the discussion with panel 511 that it is as useful as HTTP redirection in the sense that it requires some intersect HTTP, and that's basically non-star. I see people nodding. I consider this dead. If anyone thinks that this is alive in some way, then please speak now. Come to the mailing list with your reasons for why this is not dead and discuss that. Until that new information. That's all I had. And I'm the last guy.
Hi, I'm David Olson, and the co-author on this was Kyle LaRose. A bit of background on this is before the last IETF, we wanted to get some stuff moving in the hackathon, and we needed a framework to rally everyone around. So we wrote this up with the our understanding of what people were talking about, and it seemed to be get a lot of traction. So then we got some feedback on it, and we've updated it since then. So next slide, please. So these are some of the updates we got from feedback. So there's a version 1 now. We've made it so that there's an emphasis on the devices voluntarily participating in the captive portal, because some people thought we were, requiring devices to announce themselves and participate, and we wanted to make that clear that you could turn that off if you didn't want to. We added a section on architectural principles, to like a mission statement, if you will. It was mentioning provisioning domains might be relevant, so we added a section on that. Someone said we should be using RFC 2119 language, so there you go. So we tried to make it, use the capital musts, and actually not so many musts, mostly shoulds. Someone said the IoT stuff was maybe too complicated and a bit of a distraction, so we've taken it out for now, at least, not to forever, but just to try to make things simpler. And in our picture, we separated the API functionally from the web server. No, they may not necessarily be separate, but we functionally pulled them apart. And generally trying to clean up language. Next slide, please. So these are the principles. I've paraphrased these. They're a bit more wordy in the document, but we sort of said, we don't want the solution to require man in the middle of DNS or HTTP, to inform the user. We want to find something better than that. We wanted to use internet protocol. This would, exclude, access specific technologies or link layer technologies. We wanted to be able to notify users of things like, BitTorrent and voice, and, users who didn't happen to be just doing HTTP in the clear to know that they were captive. And we also thought we want to make this explicit captivity. So currently, captive portal being detected by a request to a well-known URL, and you know what the answer is supposed to be, and if you get something different, you infer that you're captive. We wanted a message to say you are captive, and this would help with machine response, and of course, incrementally deployable. So today's devices with the new networks with today's devices. And try to improve the trust and ideas. And I'll get to a slide on that later. Next slide, please. So this is a nicer picture than the ASCII art, but it's the same, I believe. So the parts in here. So obviously, user equipment, that's the end user's device. We've got a provisioning service, which is, think of that as, DHCP or router advertisements to tell the user how to talk to the captive portal. We've got the actual captive portal API, which can be queried for, am I captive? What are the parameters of my captivity? Which also could be, Capport API could be provisioning domains. Solution could fit there. There's a web server, which is where the user is given the human user is given the experience of understanding why they're there and what they have to do to get out of the portal, to get out of captivity. And then there's enforcement, which is the thing that actually blocks your packets and possibly responds to them. And it's the thing that's actually keeping your packets from reaching the external network. So hopefully that's all easily understood. Next slide, please. So on the enforcement point, currently devices in this function will have rules set up to block most traffic trying to access the internet, and we'll have specifically allow traffic to the web portal, possibly to some partner sites, possibly to some advertisers. And for certain, otherwise, if it's like port 80 HTTP, it might change it to a redirect message or to, just a JavaScript or change it in some creative way, or modifying DNS to try to get, when you go to your favorite web page, it will send you to the portal instead. And this is where we're proposing the new ICMP messages be coming from, which is what David Bird's going to talk about. Anyway, we think that this the newer approach of the ICMP really is an improvement to just reacting to port 80 HTTP. But admitting that for the backwards compatibility issues for the incremental migration, that port 80 modification may need to continue for some time. The last point there.
Ben Schwartz, how will this interact with DNSSEC validating stub resolvement?
So we're saying we should not be modifying DNS in the future. And the DNSSEC is one of the reasons that it's going to stop working. And actually, there were some questions about to what extent this is currently used. Apparently, some IETFers were noticing their DNSSEC being modified in some places. So we've got some mostly anecdotal evidence, I think, that some portals are doing it. So we're not recommending DNSSEC modification, except for possibly portals may need to keep working the way they're working today for devices that don't support it.
The point here is that there's a bunch of devices out there that are relying on the fact that the 180 rewriting is happening. And so these devices are not going to suddenly stop shipping that when 99% of the devices out there still don't do all of those things.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we just have to put a little bit of framing around it. I think what's in the draft is fine on that,
Okay.
on that point.
I just want to point out that if we are going to sort of mention a sort of legacy solution to be used for some time going forward, we should probably just pick one and not sort of document and endorse multiple bad behaviors.
I don't think anyone's endorsing this.
Well, I think
They're just saying that it's going to need, it's likely needs to continue because this is the only way to do it.
it's an interesting point, though. We might be able to say that the recommended way is perhaps a particular kind of port 80 thing, right? And say, if you're doing DNS, maybe you should look at this other way, which achieves the same thing. I don't know if we would say anything like that or not, but we might take a note on that. Next slide, please. Okay, now a little bit about the API. Now this is the way in which the device asks in a nice way, what are the parameters of my captivity? Do you want to jump in, Tommy?
Yeah, I just had a comment on the last part or question. So when we're specifying the legacy behavior, are we saying this in terms of like client behavior interacting with the portal or what the portal does?
Well, I was talking about what the portal does.
Right, because maybe I think we can make strong recommendations in terms of what a client should do in interacting with legacy portals. And I imagine that we will likely have clients move to new protocols before we see large deployment of portals. And so it's more going to be a problem of how do clients fall back to old portals than new portals.
Yeah. Do we have a survey on that coming up, or was that Mariko had some information? It might be hard to get. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we need to point the story in both directions. And so that advice on both sides is probably advisable. If you could look at what's in Parliament Day's draft here and have some advice to do that.
One tricky thing about that might be, it might be hard to get currently we see like Apple devices going to apple.com/amicaptive or something, and Google devices going to something else, and it may not actually be one that we can tell them all to use that they will be willing to use. Okay, so this is so the idea of this API is this would be the URI of this would be delivered in DHCP or router advertisements. And it's a place that a device can go at any time and say, okay, am I captive? What do I need to get out? I'm just waving my hands here. I don't want to define this exactly, but I did say it should be idempotent, which means that the device can do multiple gets on this whenever it wants to find out what's going on, and not have strange side effects every time we go. It basically, for the most basic behavior, I think coming back to the minimum feature set is, am I captive, and an interface to go to the web application to find out more, right? And some of the advanced things that we can talk about for the future may be to understand how many bytes I have left or how much time I have left. And, people were talking about financial transactions and things like that, but I don't want to go there right now. Anyway, we think this way of delivering notification of am I captive and what URL to go to for the web page is an improvement over the man-in-the-middle modification of the HTTP to find out what URL I should go to. And this API, I note that the provisioning domains might be this API. It could fill this need. Next page, please. And I don't want to explain provisioning domains exactly, but the role, there was a bit of confusion for a while because we added provisioning domains to our draft, and then the next day the provisioning domains draft removed the captive portal example. But I think, and then in the hackathon, the provisioning domains did captive portals. So, so I think the provisioning domains people are supporting because they're here. I don't pretend to understand the details of the authentication of the provisioning domains, but I thought it was interesting that there was an attempt to define, to say, this request you did can be authenticated in some way, to try to build some trust. Now, some of the, right, so to avoid masquerading hotspots, right? So, the fake airport, Wi-Fi, and then war driving type stuff. So some of the things, I don't want to really start this conversation now. This is one of the rat holes, but these are some of the questions that I heard and that we can, for future discussion, is whether this is a too special case for provisioning domains, or whether this API is even required. Some people are saying that this API isn't even required because all the devices should always just, probe anyway to see if they're allowed. And there's an issue of redundancy with RFC 7710, which is the DHCP and router advertisement options for the captive portal web page. So if provisioning domains are used, there's also DHCP options for those. So if we go down that path, we may need to obsolete 7710 if we not going to use it. So there's some questions there about, the way I see it is 7710 is announcing, here's how to get out of the captive portal. And provisioning domains is saying, here's a really generic way of telling devices about stuff, and one of which is captive portal. So it may be a more general solution. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some of my questions are similar to Martin's. Okay, don't need to say. Yeah, so if there's interest in adopting this, well, obviously we got to set the scope as a working group. Yeah, so whether with captive portal ICMP, should there be an API or not? What are the requirements? What about trust? I think that so far what the web interface does is entirely out of scope. I think that's the right thing, which means we're not going to say anything at all about what the web page shows you or what it asks for or whether it's allowed to show you ads or anything like that. So that's just all we'll talk about is the URL to go to the web page for a human to participate. And also, do people want to bring the Internet of Things devices back in or not? Do I want to be able to get a device without a screen into a network? There are different devices you could talk about. Do I provision it with Bluetooth with enough information to get through the portal? What do I do? So that's another question of whether to get in there. But I think based on what Martin's saying earlier on scope is that we should just not go there right now, but kind of have a vision of where we might put it later. Next slide, please. And I also wanted to talk about a little bit about trust. We mentioned this in the security sections. of the architecture. If you think about existing mechanisms, you do a request to a well-known URL, you get back something, right? You have very little reason to trust that, and you have a lot of reasons to suspect that there's some kind of phishing or it's some kind of bad thing. So, currently it's, the browsers will sandbox you in this case and, limit what you can do and not let you do any kind of, access, use all the capabilities of the browser. And this breaks what some portals want to do is they want you to do maybe like Facebook login or something. So the browsers might block that. So then the portals try to defeat the Capport portal detection. All sorts of games are played. So, I'm saying, what if we could build trust so that, when I attach my laptop to a Wi-Fi, it can say, you are attached to the Hilton's Wi-Fi, and there's like the little padlock in the corner of your screen, and that this is actually the Hilton's Wi-Fi. Now, you might be willing to put your name and room number in. You don't mind telling the Hilton your name and room number. So I think that this may lead to better experiences. Is that the last slide? Oh, you have Martin.
I'm Martin Thompson, taking off my chair hat because I actually have spoken to folks at Mozilla about this. So Firefox actually does the captured portal detection and throws up the URL on some platforms where the native platform has failed to do the detection because it's being defeated or what have you. And we don't do any sandboxing. And Lorenzo is probably going to tell me all the reasons why that's not, why we have a special API and the fact that you can do all these sorts of things. But there's a bunch of things there. Our philosophy here is that it is not particularly difficult to get someone on the internet to visit your website. And the basic underlying threat model that we operate in the browser with is basically that should be safe to do. You should be able to show anyone any web page, and though the pixels that are displayed on the screen might be offensive, that's about the extent of the harm that's actually done to you. And so there is no actual need for sandboxing from that perspective in our estimation. However, there may be some practical considerations in terms of the fact that you have an operating system that doesn't want to open up that network interface at the point that you are negotiating for access to the internet. And so you may need to use special APIs in order to get those network requests out over that interface. And in order to support that, then there may be implementation challenges for doing that in browsers who expect that when they make a request, it just goes onto the network and normal routing rules apply. And they don't have any facility to deal with the fact that this needs to go over a particular path. So in principle, I think we're okay, but this is a huge rat hole. And I think we need to be a little bit cautious about getting into this too much. I would like to get an answer to this problem that we all agree on in this room. But I'm not sure whether or not this is exactly the right time to start.
What's the question you want the answer for?
The general question that you're asking here, which is, should we be sandboxing? Should we be making any recommendations about that and so on and forth? I'll let Lorenzo talk now.
Lorenzo Colitti, it's kind of funny because we own that code and I don't know the answer, but my feeling is, my understanding of the current situation, it's hard to say until you come up with a plan and then actually vet it with all the stakeholders. But my understanding of the reason why Android does sandboxing is not security, it is technical. It is simply that Chrome just has no expletive idea of how to do something that's not on the default network. If somebody wrote that code, we would have a very different conversation. So until that happens, we're basically, the cookie store is sandboxed off from the application store. And so that's why we have to have our own app. We don't like it. The users don't like it. Nobody likes it, but that is the reason. And it doesn't seem to be the case that the Chrome team would be particularly willing to address this problem. And so here we are. So it also seems strange that people would defeat this detection just to get around the sandboxing. But I suppose maybe that's what they do.
Now we have positive signal.
Yeah, current.
Tommy Polly, Apple. Yeah, so I mean, I think in our case, the reason that we have a sandboxed captive web sheet probably started out also like, oh, we had to go over the special interface, although now we would have the ability to force Safari to go over the captive portal if we wanted to. What? All of it or only certain tabs, yes. But I think there is a perception, at least of people working on this, that yeah, we don't want to have cookies leak into their session, so you'd almost want it in some type of private browsing mode. But people do and have defeated our probe a lot because our sandbox one doesn't support like full video watching capabilities, etc. So that's been the main thing. Now that's kind of a technical implementation thing, but we do know that this arms race is very possible and it is happening, and we should try to back away and establish trust. I like the trust.
I guess, clearly you can put trust on whatever page you forward to, but I think it's also the API itself, or basically a trusted way, when someone gives you a URL to go to, if there's, you can be some increased trust in that as well.
So the argument that held sway, like I said, we actually didn't ask the question because the code hasn't been written yet. But the argument that held sway in first instance with the security person who was looking at this was the user clicked on this. If the captive portal operator wanted to steal anything, they just wouldn't have put up the portal. Done. And so he's like, yeah, I guess. And so I don't know if that's worth, maybe, if that's worth revisiting. But in our case, it's a technical issue, right? So.
That's the last slide then? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wanted to make one more point. We referred to, when writing this, we referred to the problem statement, the Nottingham Capport problem, which has a lot of really good points in it. And if this group is not going to adopt it, we would probably put some of them into the architecture document. So I just wanted to.
I think that's reasonable. Mark has indicated that he's not interested in maintaining the document. And if you want to adopt some of it, I think that is the best way to proceed.
As a new document? Or?
Into your document, that's your place. And if people are happy with that. How many people have read this? Well, that's good. Yeah. I'm just going to ask. Should we adopt it? Does anyone? Okay. I'm about to do the hum, but does anyone want to speak against it? Signal in the form of words, right, before I ask for signal in the form of speech. So,
how much of it? How much of it? There's a lot to it, right? There's a lot of questions.
So one of the nice things about adopting the working group document is that you no longer have to change the document. And so if you don't like something,
yeah, but I'm asking what, so how, what's your feeling of how much should be adopted? Or are you asking the question of that room? Are you going to ask different questions?
My question is, and I think this is usually the question that you ask when it comes to document, is this a reasonable starting point for something that the working group wants to do? And that's the question that I think you need to ask. If there are parts that you don't like, I'm sure there's tons of bits that could be improved in here. It's a 0-1 draft, and no one expects it to be perfect. But
yeah.
If we don't want an architecture, please say. If there's something in here that is so fundamentally broken that you don't see any way out of it, please say. Those sorts of things. Reasons for entry.
Oh yeah. No, nothing like that. It just seems like I think we should try to have something that's, minimum viable, because otherwise we risk sort of, going off into the weeds. I think, and also it has to provide a clear advantage. And to my mind, the reduced interaction, all that stuff sure it's very nice. The thing that we can't have today, even if there were no arms race, is like we don't know how to re-up the portal before it expires. Like, so I think, you know, if we improve one thing, then that's the one we should improve, I feel.
I don't inherently disagree with adopting this document. I have sort of a concern that affects adopting this document, though, which is, I guess when this group started, I thought it would be sort of like behave. And it would say, how do captive portals work today? What's good? What's bad? What are best practices? And then we would get to the point where we said, okay, even the best captive portals could do better if they did certain things. Now I feel like we're saying, this is what we wish captive portals worked like. Do you understand? And I'm not really positive a document that says, this is what we wish captive portals worked like, in the absence of implementations or protocols or anything, has value. And so we might have ended up with an architecture in the world that I pictured, but now I'm not sure what we're going to end up with. Like, we're going to end up with an architecture and what? You said it'd be great if we came out with anything, and I don't think it'd be great if all we came out with was an architecture document, because that doesn't make anything happen.
That's true. We're not done yet. But yes.
Tommy Polly, what I got up to say, which dovetails well into that, is that, so I like the document. I think it's on the right track. I imagine that this will be going in parallel as a working group draft to all of the protocol parts, and that likely this document won't close or go out to last call and be an RFC until those ones are mostly finalized. And so what I'd like to see for this is essentially at the end game of this, whatever's been decided, this is the entry point. Like if you're coming from outside the group and it's like, they did 4 RFCs, how do these work together? This is the one you read to understand how they all fit together, and it reflects all of the other parts that we decide to put together.
I'd have a similar view of, it would evolve in parallel, and anything we decide not to do, we would take out.
Right.
And
So yeah, this should not go out without.
Do anything. I mean, that was still an outcome deal, decide to do nothing, and then we don't do this. We're not adopting
I'm-
the room. We'll ask them.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if it might make sense for us to listen to the other presentations, agree on a basic direction we want, and then agree we're going to adopt a modified version of this document and at least one protocol-y document. Do you know what I mean? That would make me feel better.
Maybe we'll come back to this at the end. We've got a little bit.
But I mean, I think Dave's doing a great job of writing this. I mean, it's not like this document that I have an issue with. I don't want you to think that. I just...
okay, I won't be offended.
You're addressing the structural issues, and I think Adam's going to cover this here.
Adam Roach. So the one thing that I wanted to mention was if you decide to adopt this and to publish it, think really hard about what archival value it might have. Because
So Tommy identified a couple of things. Its ability to signpost the space was one thing that you actually said to Mike. The other thing you said earlier was the sort of best practices for transition strategies.
okay,
And that is valuable, I think.
all right.
So the two things that I've seen here, as well as establishing terminology and all the sort of other fluff that it does, those are the concrete valuable things.
Okay. And then the other thought would be how much of that can move into the architecture document? Like, would it make sense to merge these? Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so the problem statement contains a bunch of stuff. Some of it's valuable, some of it we've used already. Thank you very much. We don't need to publish that. Yes.
Right. So I know the publication of architecture document I think is generally good, but problem statements typically look like requirements, and that's the sort of thing where you have to think really hard about why you'd want to put that into the RFC series.
Yeah, so the discussion I had with Mark was, well, hasn't it already served its purpose? And I don't really have time to edit it, and most of this information is now available to the working group in the form of we understand it now. And so its value has been served, but Dave's point was that there's still some value that's not what needs to be salvaged.
Did I hear you say you would want to put the recommendations for legacy or sorry, migration approaches into this as well? Did I?
That's what I heard from Tommy also.
Okay.
It seems like a valuable thing to have.
Sure.
coexistence between the, whatever crap that we have.
So
in the past.
we could also then, that could be a best practice for supporting the legacy devices as well. Yes.
All right, we're slightly ahead of time, but not a lot. So what's next on the agenda is something else.
I'm David Bird, and I'm here to talk about Capport Portal ICMP. So fundamentally, I think notifications should come from the network, not from an application. This is not a foreign idea. I mean, notifications come from the network already. So let's take a closer look at the network and at the NAS. And what is the NAS supposed to do when it gets a packet? So right now it has a few options, right? I mean, you can allow the traffic and forward it. This is like your walled garden resources, DNS, the Capport portal itself. Of course, there's the HTTP redirect, and there could be other things that hotspots do, but I'm not going to go into that too deeply. Or it can block. But what does it do when it blocks, right? So it can either silently drop the packet, return an existing INCP error, like destination unreachable, administratively prohibited, or it can do something protocol specific, like a TCP reset. But none of these actually give the UE any real indication of what really happened to that packet. Next slide. So what I propose is really two flavors of ICMP. The first one is an ICMP extension based on RFC 4884.
Just clarifying question from confusion in the audience of definition of NAS, just because I don't think everyone knows that.
Server. Network access server. So it comes from Radius, sort of the world. This is your NAS. Yeah. I mean, this is literally whatever piece of software that is deciding what the fate of the packet is, forwarding it. I mean, it could be Linux itself, right, with IP tables. Next slide. So what is this? So the ICMP extension is meant to be added to the destination unreachable packet today. And it basically gives the NAS ability to accurately inform the Capport portal UE of what really happened to the packet, while also giving some indication for legacy devices. Because for legacy devices, the NAS will still have the same three options. Is it forwarded, is it blocked, or is it redirected? So it'd be interesting to have a formally defined what the NAS should do in the Capport portal networks for both Capport and legacy devices. Next slide. So I'm also proposing a new ICMP type altogether. And this ICMP message carries the same information as the extension, except this ICMP message is specifically not intended for legacy devices to understand. And use cases I believe this unlocks are the non-flow terminating notifications. So this might be like a location where you're not captive, but you might be at a low tier of bandwidth. So these messages could basically notify the UE that you're suggested to visit the Capport portal to upgrade your session. The NAS is also in a position to indicate changes in policy notifications. The NAS is the component that will be making this switch between captivity and not. So it knows when when the access policy is going to change. And it can be probably in a vendor-specific way, but it can be told to enforce a new policy after a certain amount of time, and then the NAS has the ability to notify the UE prior to changing the access policy. Next slide. So just quickly, just to go over what Capport ICMP codes or C types we would use in the extension. So I see three different sort of message types, which is that your packet was dropped and your flow should be dropped. So basically destination unreachable, but it's annotating it with the Capport portal. So Capport portal is required there. You might also get a drop notification for a packet, but that is not session terminating. And this might be like the QoS, the bandwidth limitation indication. So again, this is a suggestion to go to the Capport portal, not a requirement. And then you can warn that a flow is about to be dropped. And again, this is basically an indication that your time is about to run out, or your data is about to run out, or what have you. Next slide. So ICMP allows for some fields. They have, the standard ICMP header has some unused areas that every specific type, typically uses. So I proposed some fields to go in there. So one would be the session ID. And this is really just meant to help the UE group ICMP notifications into more or less a single event. Because you will be getting notifications from different, resources that you're trying to access. So it makes sense for the UE to try to, coagulate that into something, more meaningful. It could also indicate a change in the session ID. It could also indicate a change in access policy. So any timers the UE might have related to the old access policy, it should just disregard. And there was a concern that ICMP might be susceptible to forging. So as a UE tries multiple resources on the network and gets these ICMP messages, if they all have the same session ID, the chances of it being forged from an external party is even more unlikely. And then I propose a flags field, which can give some extensibility to this protocol. So I have some examples of some fields that would be useful in my opinion. A validity time, which is basically how long this notification should be considered.
Clarification question.
Yeah.
If the NAS can make up whatever session ID it wants, how does the session ID allow the increased confidence in the message not being forged? How do I distinguish the NAS changed its mind from a forged ICMP message?
Well, so I'll turn around and say that you could assume that you might be being barraged with forged messages if the session ID is changing. But I mean, so you have more context, obviously, in the UE to determine if this packet was fake or not. So I mean, you have the quoted headers from the original packet. So it's still good, right? But someone needs to be in line to be able to forge your quoted headers.
No, actually
Hey.
it doesn't. Oh, no.
You need to put on the mic. Come to the mic. Steve Dolson here. My understanding was that, potentially if you're streaming or something, you might get 1,000 ICMP messages or whatever. And the session ID might be a way of just filtering out them so that you only receive the message once. Was that what you were thinking?
Yes. Yeah, the security context was more from the last IETF where it was brought up as ICMP generally doesn't have the entropy, is what it was stated.
You don't need to be on path because everyone talks to the same port on the same IP address. And so you just fake your messages from that port and IP address. And ephemeral port ranges in common OSs aren't that large. So you're pretty sure that somebody's going to go to whatever, cookie.facebook.com and port 443. So, okay,
That's
that's
source port.
sure. And there's not very many of those. There's like, I don't know, there's a few thousand.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, you can do that with ICMP destination unreachable right now. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and it
this is-
doesn't do anything. And you do that. Exactly.
I don't know if we should be going down this hole right now, but that was in the architecture we said that the ICMP don't have to be impossible to guess, just kind of hard to guess, because the side effect of it is going to the API and saying what's up, which you will rate limit. So even if someone can send you an ICMP message with the correct inner quoted packet, So your side effect is just, going and asking the API, what's up? And it might say, nothing's up. So that's why we didn't put the URL in the ICMP message, right? There's very little impact to receiving one.
Tommy. Right. I like that clarification of saying that this is being used in conjunction with the other API work. So I find the initial just like you're blocked ICMP. I find that useful, especially the first ones. I'm concerned about growing complexity in the details that we can add into here and the extensions. Especially if we do have some other way, which hopefully is a trusted HTTPS connection that we can make up to some API portal that we can interact with, that should be able to do all the trust stuff. So just saying something's weird, go talk to them, hopefully would be enough. And that way we don't have to worry about the validity quite in the same way as what's in here. And so I'd rather leave as much as possible out of the ICMP details.
Sure, I can understand that. I mean, my concern with the API giving that information is that the API might not be the source of truth. In this, the NAS knows what's going to happen. It knows what it's doing. It knows when it's going to change what it's doing. No, I mean, I'll get to my last slide. Will show you like maybe a more complicated hotspot where I'll show you where one application may not know the whole truth. Next slide. So I'll just quickly go over the message types. So this is just the new ICMP type, and flag, session ID, go into the standard ICMP header, quoted message, and then the optional fields. Next slide. The extension format is basically the same thing, but with the RFC 4884. So this is the length out of the 4884. It specifies the amount of quoted headers, and then the extension object follows it. Next slide. And so we put the same information in the extension header. Next slide. Because the Capport ICMP wouldn't make sense to be in a destination unreachable fragmentation message. So we don't need to preserve the MTU field. So we could actually shorten the extension object to to move those fields up into the standard header. Next slide. So I've heard lots of comments that this is too complicated, which I find interesting just because I consider it pretty simple. I mean, this is actually things that the NAS is already doing. If you don't have a route somewhere, you get a destination unreachable, already. To me, it makes no sense to ask an API what the network's going to do. Just like it would make no sense to ask, an API, do I have a route to 8888? My other concern is that we don't want to dump the complexity onto the WISP, the wireless ISP. A lot of people have the opinion that hotspots are broken, that there's lots of moving parts, and this is largely true, but it's largely because of there is a lot of complexity that a WISP does in setting up networks, and they don't always do it correctly. Portals are broken. I mean, we're talking about 13-year-old web developers, right? I mean, the bars of becoming a WISP is you have an AEP and a venue, right? I mean, and you have a services company that you might want to hire. And I was also going to suggest that we don't assume a single vendor. So the NAS functions could actually be split up between multiple systems. So you might have a NAS sort of router doing the time and database calculations, but you might have a completely different system doing your rate limiting. So, an API, there's a lot of infrastructure implications with the API. All these systems have to be talking to each other and talking to each other well. Otherwise, we're just going to consider the hotspots even more broken. Next slide. Yeah, so moving forward, question?
I don't understand how we can simultaneously say that the ICMP should be a hint to say, hey, go check the API if something has changed, and also say that the API and the ICMP message could be out of sync. Because that's a whole lot of battery that I'm spending.
I'm not arguing that the ICMP should tell you to go to the API to check the
but
data
then
status.
we need security, because to Tommy's point, right? Then we need it to be solid and robust, and you've got these forging attacks. Because like if some web developer who's not an expert in networking has an access point in a venue, as you said, and forgets to disallow crosstalk, then I can get Eric's phone. It's like, oh, look, Eric, and I'm just like bombard him with ICMP messages. But
I don't think that our working group is trying to solve the open Wi-Fi problem.
I'm just saying we need some security if that's the case. If it's a hint, because
Well, then we go to
if that can cause a notification to be displayed on somebody's screen, then there has to be security. Right? That's just not okay. If it just says to the device, go check the API, then that's fine. But like saying then, well, the API won't know what's going on because they don't need to network what's going on, then that seems like a recipe for disaster, because we will just like thrash between these two sources of information. It's like, oh, let's do a query. Oh, an ICMP. Oh, let's do a query. Oh, an ICMP. Right.
Tommy, yes, building off of that, I see your point, but I don't have a ton of sympathy for the network configuration here and the complexity, because in a captive portal today, the way that it works is that there is a web server that is redirecting my traffic that knows all the information, presumably, about the fact that I'm blocked. I can interact with it at a high level. It will tell me how much time I have left. I type in my credentials, it lets me through. Like, they already have...
That's not always true.
So sometimes the captive web portal that I'm going through
the captive
is
portal
wrong.
doesn't have to be an application at all. It could just be a static page.
Right, it could be a static page, and I imagine that, like, so my assumption is that whatever we do on this API hopefully should be simple enough to do, that is as simple as serving up what you have today on a portal.
No, I don't doubt that.
And so it should not be any harder to deploy the API in a way that understands the network configuration, what you're being blocked on, than it is to deploy what you have today with a captive portal that serves up a web page, whether it's static or dynamic.
Could you bring up the next slide, actually? Okay, so I drew up an example overly complicated hotspot. So let's say we have a venue. This could be a hotel, it could be a coffee shop, it could be someone's house. They have an access point. So typically, an access point, commercial grade ones anyway, will have features such that you can have a hotspot completely internal, or you can put one or more of these systems remotely. So like a lot of access points will, Cisco, Colubris, HP, they'll let you do everything internally. You local users, local web pages, local images, all in the AP. As you get a little more advanced, you start, putting your systems more remotely. You might even hire a hotspot services provider like hotspotservices.com, who provides the portal, provides radius. It might provide you with billing processing and maybe some vouchering, and they might even hook you up with some roaming partners like Boingo or iPass. The venue might have their own roaming partners and marketing partners of their own that this guy doesn't even know about, because the AP actually lets them configure multiple radius servers based on realm. So this portal could just be a static web page that simply redirects you back to this guy takes off radius, and then you're authenticated. The portal or this guy's radius still have known nothing about that session. Only the NAS does. Sure, a network engineer could fix this. He could proxy through his radius server. He can make sure accounting is all squared. But it just puts a burden of implementation so much on the WISP. An industry that we already complain doesn't do things correctly, and we assume that they're going to do this flawlessly. I don't buy it.
All right. Martin Thompson. So this is very much hats off. One of the pieces of feedback that I got about this particular piece of work is the in addition to the fact that there are far too many bits and there are too many messages and whatever else, and perhaps even to the point that why do we even need a bit at all? If the destination's unreachable, maybe that's a good enough signal in some place. Setting that aside, if you have the ability to provide this signal, you provide the network provider with the ability to create discriminatory services. And that opens up a huge can of worms. And it doesn't sound like it's a lot, but if you can say that I'm going to make you captive if you go to apple.com, but not if you go to google.com, suddenly we have a problem.
That's what a walled garden is.
That's what the walled gardens are. But what you've done is you've exposed those levers
I'm not sure
back
that's
to the
really where our
client.
working group should go, though.
Right, and this is the caution, and you know, Chair hat back on again. If that's where we go, we're not prepared for that. We're not doing that. That's not in our charter. If we start down that path, we've failed. It is not forbidden. Nothing is forbidden, but we should really be very, very careful when we start talking about these things, because if it changes the balance of power between users and the networks that they interact with in a rather fundamental way.
Networks, though, right? I mean, this is public.
Yeah,
access.
this is the argument that's played, and it says, like, yeah, you don't have to buy business class. Can we forbid it in the charter? Well, we have a charter right now, and it's possible that we could re-charter, but maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can just be adults about these things.
Forbid business models, though.
So
You're saying that you can't sell higher tiers of quality service?
oh, we're going to have that argument. Yeah,
No, I'm
this
just
is
surprised that we're talking about business or. Well, but that happens today with walled gardens. I mean, this doesn't change that one bit.
So you're
right?
so the point is that we're changing the dynamics in the market in a way that could be detrimental, or a way that we do not understand, and we need to be very careful when we think about these things, because we don't just have effects on, you know, the NAS provider and the way that they have to do engineering to get the information to the right places. We also have social effects and downstream effects on users and services on the network who may be detrimentally affected by these practices. And you may not subscribe to a particular philosophy on this or not. I think that's irrelevant. The question is, if we embark down this path, we have the responsibility of considering those things.
Are your comments specifically to ICMP or just what we're doing here altogether?
So this what we're doing here altogether, yes, more in general, but this one has a particular special characteristic.
Tell me how, though?
Because I can decide to send different signals on different paths, right? And you've provided a signal that is non-terminal, as in you will continue to be able to use the network, but you're receiving different signals for different destinations that you're interacting with in the non-terminal, you know, the non-destination unreachable case. And so you have to be, I'm just cautioning, something for people to think about when they think about this draft.
Dave Dolson. So I can see where you might go with that is, if we structured if we actually went this far to define the API between the enforcement point and the back end, we could structure it so that the only thing you can say is on and off, and we don't give like a lot of fine-grained access control. So if we designed but it isn't currently in scope, but if we design that API, we could have some input into that.
Yes.
So.
And that will be feedback for the API, is that maybe we need to be very careful to avoid creating those sorts of discriminatory controls.
So we could make an API that only has one tier. Like that's kind of might be a way.
Do you have anything more? I think what we're going to do at Margaret's suggestion is run through all the presentations, have these discussions. I think we'll probably have about 5 minutes at the end where we can talk about do we want to do A, do we want to do B, C. Okay. I think next up is
Hello, everyone. I'm Tommy. I'm one of the co-authors on the PVD draft, which is actually a draft in int area, although it's related to this. Pierre is also here as my co-author. Next slide. Oh, David, just sorry. Sorry. He's always here. All right, so just a quick review of what PVDs are, because as has already been mentioned, they are more general. They come from MIF, they come from multiple interfaces. So a PVD is just a consistent set of network properties that either is implicit, so we all have implicit PVDs by definition when we connect to a Wi-Fi and we get PHCP and we get our DNS. But they can also be done explicitly, and one of the pieces of work that was never completed was defining how they are done explicitly, and so the draft is mainly about that. So in the draft, an explicit PVD is advertised as an FQDN identifier through a router advertisement, and that is the only way it works. And the point of that is to say that the network knows that it is essentially giving you a provisioning domain. If I receive multiple RAs with multiple PVD IDs in them, I am now aware that the network thinks it is providing multiple uplinks that I could use independently. The draft also specifies that you can use a JSON API based on the PVD ID to talk to some resource to get more information about the PVD. That is an optional part, and the RA signals if there is anything more to be said. And so in the original draft, there were captive portal properties directly in this JSON. To clarify why they were removed in the update, I think that it's mainly because we see the API work going on for captive portal specifically. Having our own list within this general document, which is mainly about specifying the RA, was not particularly useful. And I imagine that if we decide to go this route, which I think does fit well for captive portals, it would make sense to either just in the API document say, here's how we put the captive portal API within the PVD or as like a separate thing, or have a separate like PVDs for captive portals application draft to explain how you're using the main one. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so what I wanted to do, because there was some discussion on the list, was just kind of go over the workflows that we would imagine for the various options for discovering captive portals. Yep, so actually first back. And specifically, it's separated out into discovery and interaction. I think that's a very important distinction. So most of the interaction parts are going to be on what we consider to be the API. And so in this model, the way we're thinking of it is that there's your bootstrapping discovery phase, and that is very separate, and we're trying to solve that problem with PVDs. Next slide. Okay, so here is roughly what I consider to be the status quo. Two cases, the world when I am on a captive network, I receive DHCP or I receive an RA. I pretty much always send out a probe to captive.apple.com or your Google site. I get redirected. The redirect is the moment of discovery. I then interact with captive portal. I do something to make the portal happy. That is the interaction API, and then is complete. And then from then on, the user requests just go through. And when we're not in a captive portal, it begins looking very much the same because I have DHCP, I have an RA, and then I still send my probe because I have no way to know that this is captive or not. The probe just goes through, and then I'm fine. So that's status quo. Not great. So next slide, please. Right, so problems. We do the probe all the time. It's not too bad, but it's kludgy. And now we're just essentially advertising, hello, I'm an Apple device. I'm talking to captive.apple.com every time I join a network. That's fun. There you have no updates about captivity changes. We all know that's a problem. It relies on redirects and man-in-the-middling, and there's no support for these future non-browser clients, which are not in scope for right now, but we do want to get them eventually. So next slide. All right. So as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any deployments of RC 7710 yet. But here's roughly how I imagine it would work, is that you get your DHCP or RA with the captive portal URI in it. You request that captive portal. You interact just as you did before. So In that case, the actual exchange, as far as the packets from the client's perspective, stays exactly the same. The only difference is that my moment of, aha, I'm on a captive portal, came a step earlier, but I still have to do essentially the same number of interactions that I did before. And when I don't have captivity, I still have to probe because I may be on an old network, and there's nothing, essentially, there's nothing in that option that tells me I'm not captive. So next slide for the overlay. Right. So the good thing is, yay, I don't have to redirect. I don't have to man in the middle. But we still have all the problems we had before of no updates. You still need to probe because you may not have a new captive portal implementation, and there's no way to support non-browser clients. So we're just slightly better than we were before. Next slide. All right, so here's trying to capture roughly what we have when we have the ICMP, and sorry if I misrepresent some of the stuff, but there's just my impression going through it. Essentially, we're at the same place, but we get more network updates. We can realize when we have run out of time, or we can say do more things. But still, we're in a world in which we still have to probe on network attachment, and it doesn't necessarily, unless we partner it with an API, it doesn't support anything more. And RFC 7710 alone does not really allow you to have an API or discover that API. Okay, next. All right, so now getting to how we imagine things would work with PVDs, and this is, of course, open to design. And so this may lead to like a document of how to apply PVDs to captive portals. So here's a scenario in which I am not on a captive network, but the network does have some PVD information. So let's say I'm on some enterprise network or home network that tells me, oh yeah, you have cool properties about your link. In that case, this is the generic PVD. I receive in my RA a PVD ID. It can say, oh yeah, I have support for a PVD API. We're like, cool, I'm going to do a request to this to find out my extra information. And then I learn that it's a cellular network with a certain data plan. Great. Next slide. Right, so the good thing is I didn't do a captive probe. I did still do some sort of HTTP request though. And I can get other network properties. So that's nice. Next slide. I think a key thing is that if we do the PVD ID option, and it says, I don't have any more information for you, I would like to make that a must in the PVD document that you must not have a captive portal. To essentially say, I don't need to do a probe, and that from that point on, our clients will essentially, if they ever get redirected, we're going to assume that someone is just messing with you, like you're just being man in the middle attacked, and that's not a, and like say, you're not going to get a captive web portal, we're just going to say, this is an evil network, and we drop you. So hopefully we can kind of skip that step and move into a world that if people end up supporting PVDs, if they want to give captive connectivity, they need to do it the right way. Sorry.
Saying that if you have a PVD,
Yes.
the additional requirement will be that you don't man in the middle, port 80 and do the redirection.
Or
When you say
we will assume you're not a captive portal. We'll assume you're an attacker.
you would have, if you have a captive portal, you put it in PVD and you would still.
Yes. Yes. But so essentially, you wouldn't do the implicit. Right. We wouldn't do random probing of clear text HTTP
As
pages.
soon as you see that, you would disable all of the probing and fallbacks and all sorts of other dodgy stuff.
Right. So the goal would be eventually you could get to a world in which maybe we only ever do HTTPS. We only do TLS because we get this. We can do TLS to the PVD server, and we never have to do clear text probes.
I mean, you have some odd timing related stuff if you do it that way, right? Because what you're going to say is, all right, there are 3 cases.
Mhm.
The network doesn't support PVDs. We do what we used to
We do a probe, yeah.
The network does support PVDs, and it hands you an ID,
Mhm.
and it's wide open. Awesome.
Great.
The network does support PVDs, and it hands you a PVD ID, and it's a captive portal. At this point, you have to somehow not send any traffic until you actually go look up the PVD URL and find out if it's a captive portal and do stuff.
Yes.
Or else you're going to get these redirects, which you're going to disregard and consider that some sort of an attack is happening.
Yes, I mean, I think if you receive the PVD RA option and it says I have extra information, the client behavior should be that I'm going to fetch this information before I join the network because I don't know what this, like, was essentially we will join the network, but I would not promote that network to be the primary internet routing interface until I know what it is, because maybe it's a walled garden. Maybe it says, I'm your game controller Wi-Fi network.
Yeah.
There's no point in browsing
so what
Safari
you do
on
is
it.
you brought the network up from like a, I mean, you're up on it because you can.
Yeah, I'm
but
up on it,
you're-
but I'm not routing application traffic over it until I know what it is.
Until after you do the PVD lookup
Exactly.
and get back
Right.
that it's some sort of network you might want to route traffic over.
And so during the hackathon, we built this. So Cisco and iOS added that. So essentially, like in the RA daemon, you just immediately fetch the thing, whatever you
Oh,
receive.
okay.
Yeah.
You can say he's doing the MIF thing. Interestingly, MIF was the name of working group, not a protocol. So saying you're doing the MIF thing means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
He's doing the thing that's in the PVD document, presumably. Yeah.
Lorenzo, clearly, I wouldn't be too optimistic that we'll get to this anytime soon. Because
I'm dreaming.
yeah, no, I like to think long term as well, but yeah. So the good news is I think we don't need to depend on the sort of for this approach. But I don't think we need to depend on this dream ever being realized. Because I think realistically, until we get to HTTPS everywhere, there's going to be doing this is going to. I think it's going to create the wrong incentives, and I'm not in a hurry to explore the implications on user experience of where those incentives leads. I guess I had one question which I think you answered. Your initial implementation basically waits for this to complete, but I don't know that you would want to do it because, if somebody forgot to, configure the server or whatever, we maybe don't want to spin there for a while.
Well, I mean, today, we need to work on the heuristics for that, but today we wait for the captive probe to complete before we let any traffic go over the network.
So you don't, even when you have no other interface, so when it's your
Yeah.
interface of last resort, okay.
Yeah.
So even like on an
Yeah.
iPad with no,
Yeah.
okay. And we don't do that. Okay, I see.
Right.
Thanks.
So at least for us, it's
Yeah.
trading potentially one evil for the same.
Yeah, because that could take a long time, right, if it was misconfigured.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, networks can be evil.
David Bird. I was confused on the flow. So you get the PVD ID and it says there's extra information. You go into that URL of that PVD server and it says there's no captive portal. Then you set your default route there. But what if there is?
So if they lied,
Yes.
right?
Well, how did you know they lied? You probed it?
Well, no. So for example, today, you brought this case up on the list as well. So today we do a probe. As I mentioned before, some percentage of people whitelist our probe. They lie. And then we're in a situation in which we go primary on the interface and people are redirecting our traffic and it's bad. And I think that's a solution for our platforms to determine what do we want to do when people are evilly redirecting your traffic. And so essentially it just makes that if you lie, you're going to look like an evil network that's redirecting my traffic. And maybe like today, I let the user do that, but that's not really a captive interaction at that point. Maybe it eventually gets someone to the captive portal, but the system will not consider that to be captive.
So I'd just like to interject. I think we have consensus to what degree that we're not aiming our solutions at networks that try to evade detection or lying, or maybe we need to consider misconfiguration in that category because it's undetectable or indistinguishable from lying.
What I want to make possible here is that there can be a good case in which I don't have to block on an HTTP probe before connecting to the network. That's not possible today. I want to make that possible. In good cases, that won't be everywhere, but I want to have a way to do it.
Dorothy Stanley, HPE. Maybe you've kind of answered this. How do you know to trust the information you're getting from the network? How does the client know to trust that information?
Right. So,
Or does it not, and you're assuming this is a good case?
so I think that's something that we need to do a more in-depth analysis on here. In this case, the connection to this extra information server is an HTTPS connection that we're creating that would ideally we'd be checking that it has the certificate for the PBAD it claims, which is not a perfect solution, but it's a start. As far as what's in the RA, I guess they're the people giving us all our addresses anyway. Pierre can comment.
Okay, so you're assuming HTTPS.
Yes, yes. Please, sir. Co-author.
Yeah, Eric Green, co-author. Also hiding in the back of the room as a security guy. So what we do as well into the JSON form blob that we send back, we send the prefixes that are allowed into the array. So if you extract or you advertise PIO out of a /48, for instance, you will find the /48 into the JSON. So it kind of avoids people cheating with you. You cannot grab the JSON file from an existing PVD and apply it on a network which is not one of yours. And now, as well, the server, to avoid NTP or NPT prefix translation that could bypass this restriction, the server serving the JSON file of a TLS must check that he is serving the request for the JSON is coming from one of his network as well, not from somebody doing network prefix translation. So it's not perfect, but it's raised the bar high enough, I think. But it's not perfect.
So, Eric, to your point though, I think that reduces incidences of misconfiguration
As well.
and the like. We can probably take this offline. I don't think we're getting any real security properties out of this.
That's what I say. That's
But it
I would like
does
to
support
explore that
the
more.
misconfiguration problem, at least to a degree.
David Bird again. I mean, to me, it sounded like your explanation still had the probe. You didn't get rid of the probe, right? You get the PVID, you query the query the thing, but then you still don't know if it was a bad or a good one.
Sure, but I consider user-initiated traffic to be useful requests that in the good case, if someone is browsing to a server that they want to go there, those aren't wasted packets, wasted probes. So in the case in which it says there's no other information, the only requests I'm doing are real queries rather than
But this is the
throwaway
Capport evasion, right? I mean, this is the Capport detection evasion. You just made it a whole lot easier.
Well, but I mean, they can whitelist our probes today. Like, I don't think it makes it different.
Pierre Pister, one of the co-authors as well. I just wanted to add to Eric's comments that it's in IPv6 it generally admitted that the array, although it's not secured, it's not crypto, it's not signed, there is no security on the array, it is trusted. And if you don't want to trust the array, well, you don't have connectivity at all. And if you believe that the array is not secure, then that's a problem. Well, guess what? There are many things that are worse that you can do. So, yeah. Okay, so just one more sentence. Once you get your PVD from the array that you're supposed to trust, then that PVD is a FQDN. When you retrieve the JSON, it's using HTTPS, so that's secured. And then again, with the captive portal, it's supposed to be secured.
Yeah, Lorenzo, do we need this to be better? I mean, can we just like not argue about this because we don't need this benefit?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Let me go into the next slide.
Cool. Then yeah,
Keep going.
your statement is false, but it works. But doesn't matter.
It can work. Okay. Anyway, so essentially the way it works, if you do have, there are essentially two ways that you could build captive into PVDs. Either you have you get the PVD ID, you request that, you get the PVD JSON, that tells you, oh, there's a captive URI. Then you interact with that. You can go back and forth. It can add potentially a step, or else, next slide. Essentially, if we collapse the captive API into the PVD JSON, then we can kind of save some time, and especially if we have just kind of system-only interaction, that should help as well. Right. Right. So some things that we can try to look at making things better. Explicit indication that there is or is not a portal. It at least gives an explicit hint. That's good. It can bootstrap your system level interaction. So I think the main point is that this opens up possibilities for something other than just going to the HTTP page. And again, separating the discovery from the interaction is very important here. All right. I think, is that it? Yes. Right, so lying PVDs, we've already covered that. You can read through this. I think essentially people can lie, but in the good case, we want a smooth, predictable set of interactions. I want people to be able to implement captive portals or networks that have walled garden interactions that can give predictable behavior, and hopefully people have an incentive to do that because it makes their networks look better than other networks.
Michael Abramson. So the PVD identifier, like basically if I have everything fully up and running, I do turn Wi-Fi off, turn it back on again 5 seconds later. Are you still going to like re-get the PVD information, or you going to sit on it?
Today we have heuristics around like not reprogramming captive portal. I imagine some of that would say the same. For example, if I received the RA, had the same PVD ID, had the same like there's like a generation count in there. We assume that nothing changed.
Okay.
So that should just be as simple as just getting your RA again, and you wouldn't have to refetch.
Okay, so you do this. Yeah, okay, right. You said you were doing this with the capital probing already. So okay.
Yes, exactly. And also as far as like where is this server located, I know you had brought up concerns like is it way back and not at all related to the NAS. I think for the broad cases, this PVD information can be stored a lot of different ways. But for the case of if you are a captive portal, it should be served from the same place roughly that you have your captive portal webpage today and that you would have the captive portal API. It's just the same thing that's serving this up.
You mentioned the security is provided by TLS, and the PVD is, you check the cert for the PVD.
Yep.
But do you present the PVD to the users for their acknowledgement of that they trust that PVD?
Right. So so
anyone can get a
right.
cert.
Well, right. We're still learning about this. In the demos that we did, yes, I was presenting. Essentially, the idea would be like you can join this network. It says here are the different sub networks you can join. This one's a captive portal. Here's the FQDN that it presented. Do you want to join this? So it should be user visible, yes. Yep. Next slide. Yes, it must be, yes. Right, so as far as how you express the captive portal in the PVD extended information, we could just provide, here's the URI, go do what you always did. We could provide a URI of a separate captive API server. I think that's potentially too many interactions going on. Or you could essentially extend the API that's already existing to just say, yes, continue interacting with me for your captive API.
I'm going to suggest we are out of time for this one. We take this discussion to the list. Then the discussion, that's why I let it go. But these are all things that will be input into the area document that you guys are working on, and we will co-evolve this with.
Right, and if the working group thinks this is useful, and I hope it is, it might make sense to have a separate PVD captive portal document that explains this in detail.
Someone wants to do that? Then we can talk about it. Right.
So another presentation on the Capport API. Upon the advice of the working group chair, Martin, we culled down a lot of the API and hope to gain consensus with more reduced API and then possibly build out from there, as has already been discussed. The URL retrieval through DHCP option or IPv6 RA remains. That's the 7710 stuff. The status API remains. The session identifiers remain, but it assumes that the network access requirements are going to be fulfilled through an interactive website. So the API has become very, very straightforward and simple. We can request a list of networks that we want to know about and provide a session token to get back the responsive details about the networks, whether we're permitted, when the session expires, how many bytes do we have remaining, our session token back again. As I said, we removed the network access condition, satisfaction details, the terms and conditions for now were removed in the latest draft. The passcode was removed in the latest draft. And so questions to everyone. Is reducing the API, is that a general idea? Generally a desired goal, or would we rather have the API be something that can get you through the captive portal? And if reducing it is the where we want to go, is this the right amount of reduction?
Yeah, you're fine. Chair had both on and off. I'm in favor of the reduction of the API. I do have a question about, but maybe it's for later. You have a few more slides about what the expanded definition of networks, what the non-default networks might mean to you in your conception. It could be after you.
No. So go ahead and flip back. So this had been part of my my presentation last time in Chicago. The idea with the networks is that you might have a you might have, I don't know, a walled garden or something along the lines. You might have a network access server that allows you access to local resources without any authentication, but then you need to provide some sort of captive portal authentication to get out to the internet in general. And you might have just different networks that have different privilege levels that would be defined here.
So in some ways,
the protocol would be that the first time you request, you send that exact top request, and you get back a list of networks. Default is defined to get you out to the internet. Other than that, they can make up any words that they want for it,
so is there or is there not some possible overlap with PVDs?
Certainly is.
Certainly is. Okay, that's as I would expect.
Tommy. So yes, reduction is good. I like the shortening of it. I mean, adding more stuff in later, I think is great, but in terms of the minimum viable product, getting the short one first, we can always add extensions. Yeah, as to the nested networks here, I think that definitely overlaps with the PVD stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that it's a very interesting use case, and that's part of what we were doing at the hackathon. I think it probably makes more sense to have that be something that's notified more at the kind of RA network level, and then we can fetch the information from separate queries. Right. So essentially, in this model, we get 3 RAs. I do 3 different JSON APIs to my captive portals, and this one says I'm a walled garden. This one says I'm a captive portal, and that way we can get source address selection to interact with this. So I like the direction that's going in, and honestly, it seems like this could be our API, and you can just write it. It's great. So,
No, the question here is, when you have multiple provisioning domains, do you need the extra level of indirection regarding networks at this layer as well? Right. Okay. Yeah. Let's make that very clear. Why do you have a request? What's the session token? What's the purpose of the session token? Because I think that's actually the main sticking point for me. I couldn't understand its interaction with this.
I'll admit the session token, I had stuck into the original one simply because people had said they wanted a session token on the API. I didn't see a whole lot of reason for it, but people wanted it, and so I gave it in.
Right. So I think if someone wants a session token, we have this thing in HTTP called a cookie, and though I'm sure many people, Mark's left, I will get stabbed for suggesting it. That is, if that's what you want, that's what you got. So I don't think you need to burden this particularly much with that.
Okay. I believe the idea with the session token was that it was going to coordinate with the ICMP messages, but I think that has now been lost to events because the ICMP messages don't have a single session token anyway.
Okay, maybe. All right, understood. Good.
So I'll take
and
that.
while we're aggressively simplifying, Dave's presentation mentioned something that will actually wind back the simplification. If this were able to include the interactive URI, that might save a redirect.
So I thought about getting up and standing when Dave was talking, and I decided to do it here. My original documents talked about having the URL for given through the RA or DHCP, and have that be a single URL for all of your interaction with the Captive portal. If you post and get JSON data types, you're using the API. If you post and get HTML, then you're going through the traditional one. So it'd be more conventionalized than explicit.
So I'm actually imagining a deployment where you have the thing that does this, that understands that most clients coming to it will probably be, sort of forced into it by virtue of hacking the port 80, and so it will understand how to redirect to something else that has all the HTML and user interaction and all those sorts of other things, and can do the demultiplexing stuff. But you would actually have a separate endpoint that had the HTML, and you would want to keep the two responsibilities as separable as possible. This would have to be able to understand the request for something that didn't have the right accept header in it, because that's the limitation that we have in 7710. I don't think we actually need the same limitation in PVD. So having that there would be useful, I think.
Okay.
And it would save a redirect.
That was actually going to be one of my questions coming up. So thank you.
So if you have it, and you have it here, and you assume that this URI is some different URI, where do you get this URI? Like, I mean, what the current spec says you're going to get from like 7710 or whatever, a URI, and if you go to it with JSON, you get this. And then, but then you're saying you would be sent, now a user who did 7710 and didn't do this is being now sent to the wrong place.
Maybe I wasn't clear. So 7710, you get one URI. And you go there, and if it's a legacy client, it's actually a web browser, ends up here. They will put, accept HTML and all the usual stuff that browsers do. And the point is that maybe you don't want to actually have all the HTML machinery at the endpoint that's providing this URL. You would just redirect to the thing that has the HTML for that client. And for the API client, you would serve the API from this point.
So if they do a get with type HTML, we redirect them.
Right.
And if they do a get with type JSON, we give them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you wanted to host them at exactly the same location and actually do all the stuff all on the one URL, which is kind of icky, because you don't get caching semantics and all sorts of other things, it gets messy. You could point the interactive URL back at itself if you really wanted to. It becomes a deployment choice, and you get that little bit of extra flexibility. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. Learns clearly. I like it. It's nice and simple. It's like exactly. It feels like it's almost like there's nothing left to take away, which is great. So yeah, and I think removing that extra network thing, actually that we can take away. So yeah, this is great, and I think it also, I think compared to the option of putting this stuff in the PVD, I think it's in reality we'll want to be able to evolve this differently, and this is going to be highly tailored to whichever cookie the network sniffed when you did a clear text request and what your MAC address was and all that stuff. So I would expect that that one of the difficulties with actually putting the captive parameters in the PVD is that those change every time the phase of the moon changes, right? It's like, here's how many seconds you have left, or like, oh, look, you opted into this other business deal, so now you have another 5 minutes because you cashed in a voucher at the register. And so I think having this is essentially an oracle, right? Was the PVD is kind of optimized for static information, and I think in reality, if we were to invoke the mystical, what was it, 13-year-olds, I forget what, like web developer, I think configuring this to return a different answer every time compared to like having it be able to return like the different PVD information every time and generate that on demand, that seems like this would be easier to do, easier to get right.
So, so if you did that, then when you, like in the PVD world, I guess the PVD would give you the URL to find this for that network? Because I don't want to have to do DHCP 7710 and PVD and this. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So to reiterate, kind of from the last slide I had, the options you have are, if you did want to combine PVDs with this, is either you get your kind of static PVD and then it just points you to this and you kind of switch over and do that one. Or you could, I mean, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that the PVD for a captive portal is a very dynamic thing, right? So that it could be essentially, if you don't care about any other information, you could just reduce them into the same thing. We say, here's your URI, and then, oh, look, inside that, rather than saying, here's the captive portal API URI, it just says, and here's the captive portal JSON. It's an option. So we should discuss it on the list.
I mean, I guess the question would be whether it's an expectation that if I look up a PVD based on the ID, I'm always going to get the same answer for the same ID. Or, no, okay. Okay.
Open issues, Dave Dolson had given a review that I did not incorporate in. Is Dave's way of working it had more explicit session creation and deletion, and again talking about the URLs involved. And as I said, I left the session creation and deletion to be explicit, be implicit rather than explicit. It also sounds like it's between the PVDs and the simplification. I'm not sure we actually need a session anymore. So this might be no longer relevant. Yeah.
Any thoughts on how to update this information on demand with the PVD model? It's either if you stash the information in the PVD or if you stash your redirector URL in the PVD, you can rev the sequence number. Whereas this, it seems like, it's, well, you have to count, you have to figure out how many bytes you had, and then you have to count. You better hope that your counting matched what the network counting was. And nobody decided that they were going to count IP headers or MAC headers differently and so on. And so I guess, yeah, so it seems like it would be useful if we could update this. And I suppose if we have an ICMP message that says go check again, then we can use that.
Yeah, my thought is that you could go and check this at any point in time and see the counters decrease. And it's not just a byte count. There's also like a timer count or whatnot. But my thought is that the operating system could go and retrieve this status information whenever it wants.
But I mean, how often would you do that? Would you take that as a promise and say, okay, I'm going to check at the 90% mark? Would you do that? You could do it at half, but I mean, if you had an update, but then you're kind of committing to what you say here, which might mean that your promises here have to be a lot less they have to be a lot more forward thinking, and that you might be able to make fewer promises. I don't know. Anyway, I think your answer is you don't envision a mechanism to change this, and if you want to get more up to the information, you have to ask again, which is the fine answer.
Since you mentioned me, I'm going to comment. Dave Dolson here. So part of my email and review of this, part of it was a stylistic thing on the API, and part of it was the content. I was initially reacting to the idea of post for doing this because I was thinking get, because it's idempotent, just get what's there, possibly, and also, I took sort of RESTful approach where, for different operations you want to do, it would give you point you to the URLs to do those operations. So maybe I wouldn't mind if people go back and find that email and take a look in terms of style of that.
I think we'll ask Mark to come have another look at more comments and consider the input that we had during this session and revise the draft. But think
So anyway, I just wanted to.
your comments are good to have on the list, and we can.
Sure. I just wanted to point out that before you just dismiss it, because of the operations.
I
Oh.
definitely agree with the
Yeah, the comments were made at a point where I was still trying to suggest that we should do network requirements and satisfactions via this API. So at that point, the post was required because you were actually submitting information in. At this point, with just it just being a status retrieval, I think an idempotent GET API is entirely useful, or entirely the right idea.
David Bird, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that this information could eventually be wrong or miscalculated with misaligned with a NAS. So like this, COAs might come from multiple radius servers, maybe even a local event that triggered an idle timeout or something. There could have been multiple sessions from the same Mac or from the same accounts that are billing against the same data. So like, you might be reporting their individual usage, but the radius server is really, the accounting server is really the one that's accumulating all their usage in their billing information. So I mean, there's just lots of ways that that information could be misleading or just flat out wrong.
So, do you have anything more?
That's all I had.
Excellent. So we're going to go into a lightning round of, yes, do we want this? Out of here, is that a reasonable idea? We've talked about. Let's go back to the agenda. We have an architecture document, we have an ICMP document, and we have an API document. I believe that the PDD document is not for us. It's informational and they've got quite context, but we won't be necessarily relying on that. And depending on how we do this, we may end up getting a PDD document that's specific to Capport. But that creates dependencies that I'm not sure we're prepared for just at this moment. So let's not worry about that for the moment. We'll be asking 3 questions, which is regarding the architecture document. Is this something that we should be working on and publishing and adopting? And I'll ask yes and no for each one of those 3 documents.
Could you put it to, do we want a milestone for this and just for document for this?
Okay, sure, yeah, definitely. So for the architecture document, the question is, do we want a milestone for an architecture for Capport? Do you think we do need a milestone? Come now. You think that's a terrible idea, please not. That sounds pretty clear to me. All right, over there, yeah. Right, we will confirm with that on the list, and I will not refrain from saying we'll confirm all these things on the next 5 months. The document is the document that we have here a good basis for that milestone. If you think it's a good basis, please come now. I don't think so, or you are not certain. Seems pretty clear to me. That was a yes, that seems pretty clear. And we will take that document and just confirm it. The ICMP document. Do we need a milestone for that? Do we need a milestone for providing some sort of signal? Please come down. If you're unsure or think we don't need a milestone for something like this, please come down. So that one seems a little less clear, so I'm not going to ask you down the document afterwards. I encourage those people who are unsure to articulate their comments on the list. I'll ask later about volunteers for the so the API document, let's have a discussion about that. Do you believe we should have a milestone to work through for the API? That was fast. You are unsure or don't think we should do this, please let me know. Right, so again, this particular document If you think this document is a good basis for that milestone, and we should adopt it, please on now. Okay.
So we asked the question about whether the PVD could be that API as well. How does that fit into with this hum?
Let us discuss that in the context of the document, and we'll talk about integration with PVD. I don't think we got quite far enough down the path to be able to make that assertion. My sense was that this was still an open question, and we can put that down as an open issue. And to be very clear, if we think that integrating with PVD is the right answer, we can drop the document. Just because we've adopted something to do with that way. Right. Something, yes. We can use that. And we can put multiple documents on the milestone. Just to give everyone the chance, if you think that this document should not be adopted, or you're uncertain, put something. Oh, sorry, the API. All right, I'll do that again. If you think the API document, you're not certain it's the right thing, or you don't think it's the right thing, please come down. Thank you. There'll be some discussions with the area director about milestones. I think we'll look just a couple of milestones back to those two things. That seems like the best plan. And
you're removing the survey, you're removing that content.
Correct. The point being that we don't actually have documents for those, and we don't have volunteers and editors for those documents. So we will simply abandon those. And should someone appear with documents, then Mariko is still interested in doing this work. So we're not saying please don't do the work. We don't have any milestones for things. We don't put milestones in for these ones. We'll discuss timelines with the editors of those documents. Presumably, the editors of those documents are still looking to edit those documents. Thank you. That means we don't have to go to edit them. And we'll confirm all of this on this. Cross the T's, dot the I's. That's all I have for this session. Sheets. Everyone sign blue sheets. All right. I've got one here. I don't know where the other one went. Find it, pass it around. Oh, sorry.